myself, that some of those who don't know me, and also a bit of background as well. Apologies to those who already know this stuff. I just got to repeat this for those who are uninitiated. So my name is Doug Macmillan. I'm General Manager of the Green Restoration Ireland Cooperative, and we recently ran the Farm Carbon EIP, which was focused on peat grasslands, which would be a big source of greenhouse gas emissions. So just in relation to that, we looked at predicted emissions from those. Essentially every 10 centimeters is equivalent to about 5 tons of CO2 per hectare per year in terms of change in the water level. And a key threshold figure that we came up with, my colleague who's not here, Bastian, came up with, is about 40 centimeters below the surface of the field, you have an impact. At or below that, the farming activity as it was before can proceed unchanged, but above that, the peat gets softer, it stops degrading, it stops releasing nutrients. So you do have an impact on that. And at that point, we decided we need to look at polluter or wetter farming, as Mike prefers to call it. I think I do as well. So at that point, this is where Mike comes in. I think it was a couple of years ago, Mike. I can't remember. Time goes so quickly and stretches out. But we went to see all the fantastic work that Lancashire Wildlife Trust are doing over in the UK. So we looked at their sphagnum carbon farm and their commercial farm at Rindlemost in Manchester. And we came back and basically said, we have to do that. So we set up Ireland's first on-farm polluter trials. So we set up a showroom farm, and then we call the land scale farm, where basically we're showing farmers all the options. Besides, obviously, we need wet grass. We need grass for farmers. Besides that, all the other multiple things you can do on wet peat. So very important. Wetter farming, polluter culture. I suppose, what is it? It's essentially you're farming in a different way with a higher water table. So you're using essentially you may be doing different crops. And then why is it so important? And of course, polluter culture would include not just agriculture, but also forestry. You can also have other trees growing at higher water tables. So just very briefly, the context in Ireland, for example, we have just under 1.7 million hectares of peatlands. About 1.2 or more of million of that is degraded. There's about 1/3 of a million hectares are peat grassland. 2/3 of a million hectares are cut over, which would have been harvested for peat in the past and is often abandoned. And just about another 1/3 of a million hectares is forestry. So why is polluter culture so important in regards to peatland conservation and farming? Well, I think the figure, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, I think we need to we need to restore something like 1 million hectares of peatlands annually between now and 2050, and we're about 99% off target at the moment. And from our point of view, a key policy requirement is we have to have wetter agriculture. Why is it going to be so important? Why is it going to work? Well, firstly, it lets farmers do what they want to do, which is produce food and other materials. So that's a big chunk of Mike's talk. He'll be talking about their excellent work in northwest of England on that. And then it also gives the possibility of carbon income. So everyone's talking about carbon farming, but if you really want to have income from carbon farming, you need to have peat, because the figures are a lot higher than anything else you can do. So there's that angle as well. And I think Mike will be talking about the sphagnum carbon farm as well. So that will also form another part of Mike's talk. So just as I said, we were very much inspired by the work they were doing over in northwest of England. So I suppose, depending on your perspective, you can either thank or blame Mike for everything that we've done in Ireland. That's where it all kind of came from. And I hope just very briefly that bit of context that I gave you is just to give you a sense of how important polluter culture is. Obviously, this talk is coming out of the Farm Carbon EIP, so this is Just Transitions. It's Peatlands for Prosperity project. Again, we see this as a key income stream for farmers in the Midlands, in the Just Transition region. If you have cut over peatlands, which is currently sitting there earning nothing, doing nothing, but creating a whole load of environmental problems, there's, as I indicated already, there's the possibility to raise the water table, get carbon income, and grow new crops and or produce raw materials from this, and fix all of the environmental problems of high greenhouse gas emissions, water pollution, and loss of biodiversity associated with that. So we call this a silver bullet solution. So I think that's it. As I hope I've given you a sense of why we need this. We're 99% off target. We're not going to do any of the amount of restoration that we need without farmers coming on board. And we think this is essentially the no-brainer. So over to you, Mike. You can continue my elevator pitch there, please, with all your great work.
Thank you very much, Doug. Hello, everybody. Just bear with me while I share my screen. Uh, Can everybody see the yep, excellent. So as Doug said, my name is Mike Longden. I'm the Lancashire. I work for Lancashire Wildlife Trust and John Moores University, and I'm the Peatland Programme Technical Lead for those two organisations. And I've been working in peatland restoration for just over 10 years, but in polyculture especially for just over 6. And we started our journey probably 2018, 2019. And we've learned a lot. We've made a lot of mistakes, and but we want to share our learnings, both our positive and our negatives. So I hope you find this interesting today. So the kind of things I'm going to kind of cover: where we are in the northwest of England, why are we doing polyculture, what are we doing, how are we doing it, the lessons we've learned so far, and what's next. I think that for me, this picture kind of shows you, what we're about and why we're about. We're looking at a kind of landscape problem. So how do you solve that? Where 98% of the northwest lowland raised bogs are are in a state of degradation, or have been turned to farmland, or have been milled for peat. So we have to stop. We can stop the kind of bleed around our areas of restoration, but we need to protect them, and we need to protect the peat around those. So this is the aerial picture you see from the drone is of our Winmarleigh triple SI, so that's a site of specific scientific interest in the UK. And the majority of it, it's 127 hectares, was triple SI, and the best example of lowland raised bog in Lancashire. And we bought this in 2013. But what we realised that if we were to really secure the hydrology, we need to start looking at other options around the buffers, and so where farmers can still farm, still be commercially viable. At the same time, the carbon can be kept in the ground. We can find new ways of storing carbon, and also it's not just about carbon, it's about other nature-based solutions. So it's about water storage. The areas that you see in the background, before we did a lot of the work that you see in the foreground of the picture, those fields would have been even more flooded than the ones at the bottom, at the top, sorry, are now. And we've managed to store a lot of water. We've increased biodiversity. We've definitely saved a lot of carbon, and we need to do that at scale a lot more, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. So in the northwest of England, the picture, the map in the left, the Lancashire Wildlife Trust area covers Manchester, North Merseyside, and Lancashire. So we've got a big area, and in that area there is 38,000 hectares of lowland peat, and 98% of that is in some form of agriculture, or alternative, management, not bog. So we really needed. One of the first things we did was we started to look at these maps. We started to look where our peat soils were, and one of the first, and you can see that on the map on the left. All areas are in brown, are deep peat, and all of these areas here and along here are all lowland areas of bog that we within our designated area. And then when you actually look at the map on the right, you can actually see that it kind of mirrors very, very closely to where the grade 1, grade 2 agricultural areas are. And one of the things that obviously when we're talking to farmers, when we're talking to landowners, when we're talking to stakeholders like DEFRA, it's about food production. We still need to produce food. We still need to have these lands commercial. The Lancashire Wildlife Trust, other NGO charities can't just buy all that land and turn it back to bog. So we need to find a different solution, and that's where wetter farming comes in. And from a kind of drilling this down a little bit more, one of our main areas of peatlands that was on that map is an area called Chat Moss, which Doug visited when he came over. And in 2021, we worked with Natural England and produced a report as one of the pilot reports from peat pilot reports for Natural England, and we looked at what the areas of land were currently used for within the Chat Moss area. This was once 20,000 hectares of lowland raised bogs. There's great little stories of the history of the area where things like Roman legions have gone missing and never been found, and all of these bits and pieces. So this bog was really extent. William Defoe wrote about it and said it was one of the most inhospitable places he's ever seen. To me, I love it. But what you see now on the map on the right is that the majority of it is cropland, it's intensive grassland, and a lot, and then some of it as well is turf production as well for your kind of gardens and things like that. And when we actually then use the base figures to look at the kind of carbon emissions just from those three land uses, you can see that just from that particular, from the 1,036 areas of cropland per year, using the base figures of 38.98 tonnes per hectare, we're getting an annual tonnage just from this area alone of 40,392 just for arable crops. You then add the intensive grassland, and one of the issues around turf production on these areas is it's probably one of the most profitable area, commercial viable, and it kind of turnover is just over 10 to 12,000 pound per hectare. But from a carbon perspective, for each hectare that's producing, we're estimating about 160 tonnes of CO2 equivalent per hectare per year. So the whole area at the moment of Chat Moss, we estimate is like 90,000, just shy of 90,000 tonnes of CO2 equivalent per year. And that you then mount that up over other areas of Lancashire, you're starting to get to really see why the problem what we're doing. So one solution, as Doug mentioned, is politiculture. In the UK, a lot of the UK government is starting to move towards wetter farming as a term rather than politiculture. And when we're speaking to landowners, it's a lot easier to kind of get this story across rather than saying polluty what. And the UK government, they commissioned a task force, the London Agricultural Peat Task Force, back in 2023. It produced its results, and there was 14 recommendations, and the UK government committed to actually delivering all those 14. But one of the main things was they were able to define it. So politiculture, or wetter farming, or wetter peat, is a system of agriculture for profitable production of wetland crops and under conditions that support the competitive advantage of those crops. To me, I think the most important word there is profitable production. What we're trying to do with our trials is we're trying to prove what is possible. There is lots of different things that we've moving parts on that, but what we need to make sure is that any of the things we grow are going to be commercially viable for the farmer, and that the supply chains are in place, the buyers are all aware, and the funding mechanisms are all there as well. So that is a lot of what we've been working on over the last 5 or 6 years. So for what I'm going to show is a few videos through the talk. The first one is a video we did for the EA, an animation about what wetter farming is and what it means for agricultural peat.
Making wetter farming a reality on lowland agricultural peat. Wetter farming on lowland agricultural peat is the practice of raising the water table on drained land and growing crops or managing livestock which thrive in these wetter conditions. Why do we need to do it? Draining peatland for agriculture can result in a number of issues. For the farmer, the land is often difficult to manage, especially when trying to grow traditional crops. Drained soils rapidly degrade, leading to a loss of soil and poor soil health. This often results in declining yields or the need to add additional nutrients or feed, which can be extremely costly. For the environment, peatlands naturally store carbon, but once they're drained, this oxidizes and is released into the atmosphere as CO2, contributing to climate change. In fact, the lowland peatlands in England alone emit over 9 million tonnes of CO2 equivalent per annum. the same as over 22 gas-fired power stations or over 2 million cars, and accounting for 3% of all UK reported greenhouse gases. However, by raising the water table and re-wetting the peat, much of this carbon can be protected and emissions significantly reduced, sometimes by nearly 90% in just 1 year. The England Peat Action Plan and 2023 Environment Improvement Plan have set out the case for reducing greenhouse gas emissions by raising the water table on agricultural peat. The Lowland Agricultural Peat Task Force developed 14 recommendations on next steps. So, how do we make wetter farming a reality? The key is to slow water leaving the farm catchment. This can be achieved by removing existing field drains, installing deep trench bunding to hold water on the field. This is where trenches are dug and backfilled with compressed peat, which forms a natural waterproof barrier, and blocking existing drainage ditches. Water is key. Raising the water table using rainwater, including the use of water stored from wetter periods using reservoirs, storage tanks, or constructed wetlands, is the cheapest, easiest, and most natural way to re-wet the land. The water can then be moved across field systems using irrigation channel systems with weirs, sluices, and/or pipes. These can be opened and closed to move water to or from where it's required. These can be powered by gravity or siphons, or manual or automatic pump systems. Cells can be created within fields using bunding and right-angled pipes to move or hold water in certain areas. Bunding and/or buffering can also provide very effective separation of water table levels between re-wetted areas and neighbouring fields which remain drained. Consideration also needs to be given to minimising evaporation rates from the re-wetted field, water storage areas, and any ditches or irrigation channels. In some cases, additional water on top of rainfall may be required to both raise the water table and keep it at the desired level throughout the year. Where could this water come from? Groundwater from boreholes, obstructed water from rivers and streams, mains water. Thought will also need to be given to mechanisation of wetter farming, such as lighter weight and otherwise adapted machinery used for sowing, harvesting and crop maintenance. Permissions, licences and the role of the EA. Many
We'll move on.
aspects of wetter farming will require licenses and per project require the EA.
Sorry, 1 second.
Consideration needs to be given to flood risk. Does the project require a flood risk activity permit? With an abstract providing in water for drinking, the environment. Making wetter farm.
There we go. Finally made it. Sorry about that. Me and technology don't work very well. So I stopped it there because it was going into very UK-dominated stuff based on the year. But I just wanted to kind of show why we're doing what we're doing and things. So what I mentioned earlier, that the first thing that we needed to look at was finding crops or products that could be grown with raised water table that are going to be profitable, going to be viable, and can be done. So the first project I'm going to speak about is funded by the Political to Explosion Fund in the UK, and it's about developing a productive, economical, viable crop, which is in this case it's bulrush or cattail in Ireland, and the idea, what we're looking at, the benefit of bulrush is it can be used for many things. So we're trying to see if it can be used for wallpaper with the stems, it can be used for insulation, but the thing that we're interested in, we're working with a company called Ponder, is the actual seed head. And the seed head itself, we're harvesting from this year, and what it will do, we're going to be using it in Biopuff, which is a sustainable eco textile. And there's a lot of big fashion brands. So, for instance, Berghaus, Montan, all using this. The global market for puffer jackets, which is what this textile is for, is worth 25 billion per year. So if we can switch, the clothing industry is got one of the biggest carbon footprints. So if we can work with industry leaders to actually provide and lessen that carbon footprint while at the same time re-wetting the peat, for us, it's a big win, and that's what we're looking at doing with this project. So I'm going to kind of show you how we've done the field, and then I'll explain a second trial that we're doing on how we've done it slightly differently. One of the things to bear in mind of what we've learned so far is the fact that a lot of these, each field needs certain things doing to it to make it work. So when you're actually looking at a landscape scale, it becomes a lot easier because you're looking at bigger areas to actually manage the water.
The field is sited on an area of drained lowland peat, with drainage ditches running around the perimeter and underground field drains installed throughout. There is a slight natural slope running west to east, falling by 1 metre across the 400-metre length of the field. The field will be re-wet to reduce carbon emissions and a higher water table maintained to grow a crop of typha, also known as bulrushes. The first stage is to install ditch blocks into the perimeter drainage ditch to stop water draining from the field. Underground deep trench bunds will then be installed to break through the existing field drains and to halt the flow of water across and then off the field. Deep trench bunds are created by digging a trench, in this case 2 metres deep, into the peat. This is then backfilled with more peat and compressed. This forms a solid waterproof barrier, stopping water from draining off-site. A further deep trench bund will then be installed around the perimeter of the field. This will also be raised 1/2 metre above ground to stop any surface water draining off the field. At the eastern end, an additional bund is installed to add a further layer of protection for the train line that runs alongside the field. 2 water storage areas are then created at the lowest point of the field, where the water table is naturally highest. These are approximately 1.5 metres deep and will hold rainfall and provide water to irrigate the field during dry periods. Another series of bunds are then installed, dividing the field into a number of compartments. Each of these additional bunds is 4 metres wide and is also raised 0.5 metres above ground to act as access tracks for tractors and farm machinery. The bunds are spaced so that standard tractor arms can reach across the compartments without having to drive on the wetter ground. A solar-powered pump is installed into each water storage area. This powers an irrigation system to deliver water across the field, maintaining a stable water table. Irrigation pipes are installed inside the main bunds, running east to west. At the junction of each bund, smaller irrigation pipes will branch off to deliver water into each compartment. At each junction, a gate valve will be installed. These can be opened and closed to deliver water into each compartment as necessary to maintain a stable water table at or just below the ground surface. Alongside delivering water into each compartment, excess water can also be removed and fed back into the water storage areas through a series of drainage pipes and weirs. These will be placed at the eastern or downhill side of each compartment. The pipes will run through the wide surface bunds with a manually operated weir at their opening, which can be raised to release excess water or lowered to keep water within the compartments. There will be telemetry water table measurements across the field, informing the farmer of when the irrigation and drainage valves and weirs need to be opened or closed. The field is now ready to be sown with typha seeds. In this instance, the seeds were sown using a specialised agricultural drone which broadcasts the seeds from a hopper. 2 methods were trialled to sow the tiny seeds. Firstly, by encapsulating them into clay pellets which dissolved on contact with the water, and secondly, by suspending them in a cellulose gel. The typha seeds germinate within a few weeks and are now established and growing well. The typha will be ready to harvest within 12 to 18 months, and several mechanical harvesting techniques will be trialled. This trial hopes to provide optimal growing conditions for the typha crop, showing that wetter farming could be an achievable and profitable option for some areas of lowland agricultural peat, whilst also providing numerous ecosystem service benefits, such as reducing carbon emissions, improving water purification, and increasing biodiversity.
We'll go next. So on that project, as you saw from the field, we had to over-engineer. We started this project 2.5-3 years ago, and nobody had done it at a field scale. So what we had to do, we over-engineered. So we put a lot of extra tracks in. We protected the infrastructure of the railway. British Rail were very serious that we'd get into a lot of trouble if we had flooded it. So, but what we've learned from there is that we don't need that amount of control to actually control to have hydrology across the site. So we've done a second trial in same size, about 7 hectares, and with that we just used outer bunding, and we used a stream next door to pump the water that was running adjacent to the field to pump water in, and that's what you can see from the picture there. And so across from there, the first project that you saw on the animation that created was growing typha, and the ground costs were about 15,000 to 20,000 pound per hectare, including the pump. What we've managed to do is reduce that to 3,000 to 4,000 pound per hectare, which is a lot more from when you're talking to farmers, a lot more at the scale that we're looking at is really important. The other big thing about it is on that site, we had to put the 4-meter wide bunds. I wouldn't do that again, because what we've managed to develop is the techniques using the drone that have a really effective way of being able to sow the fields, but also treat them where open if need be, so on. And the pump system also has a extra benefit, because it allows us to target nutrients across the site where it's needed based on the soil chemistry. So through the weirs, through solar pump systems, we can control the hydrology. The groundwork doesn't need to be complicated, and you can sow it, but there is, and I do stress this every time I speak about it, you can't, each field, each site is very, very different. So we do that. The next things we've kind of learned is crop management is pretty, working with the farmers is really crucial on how we can get that, how we can actually make it viable. Farmers are being paid for a long time to drain this land, so it doesn't normally come naturally to manage the water table at a higher level. So it took a lot of time with the farmers that we're working with to actually get that balance between what we're trying to do from a carbon point of view and maximize it there. The picture on the left was when we just sowed that was about a month afterwards. In the first year we got 75% cover. This year we've managed throughout the dry periods, we've had very little rain in the northwest of England over the last few since January, but what we've managed to do with that setup is maintain the hydrology about 10 centimeters below the surface. So that shows the concepts work. One of the things we do need to work on is still and learn more about, and that was mentioned in the first video, is transevaporation rates. And then the other thing that we're working on, and we will be harvesting from September of this year, is how do we harvest at scale. So we can buy and design brand new machines. LogLogic do a reed cutter that can be worked on typha, that's used in the Netherlands. A lot of farmers we spoke to in the UK, were very hands-on. They wanted to create their own machines. So with the farmer and our second trial, we bought what I call Edna, which was an apple harvester for Bulmers down in the Herefordshire, and we're in the process of basically doing scrappy challenge with her and actually creating. We've now got a new cutting head, and it's adjustable. We've got a pin shopper that can take the typha up and won't damage the typha seed heads. So, and we're hoping to kind of show that this can be done with it from September. And Edna will be doing tour of the UK, I think, next year. So all of these things, are barriers in the way of polyculture. but only by working with the farmers, landowners, stakeholders, are we able to kind of overcome most of these. And to do it at scale, we're going to need all this kind of help. So the main lessons we've learned is like the greenhouse data is still being fully analysed, but what we are seeing is positive in terms of reduction in emissions, very similar to what the papers say about for every 10 centimetres we're seeing about 4 tonnes of CO2 equivalent per hectare saving, or 4 to 5 tonnes. One of the things about TIFA is that you need to grow it when you're sowing, it needs to be into water, but during those periods the methane release is actually quite low. The other thing being, we've managed to get the setup cost really down to 4 to 5k per hectare, which works when you're speaking to people, corporates and customers for the product. That is where they want it to be. But one of the big things is the bonuses are you've got the carbon savings, but also biodiversity increase. We've got a lot of flora coming in, a lot of acidic, what would be acidic weeds and acidic wetland plants come in, over the first 12 to 18 months. But also we're having a 400% in year one, we had a 400% increase in dragonflies compared to a control area. So biodiversity. So what we're looking at is trying to figure out what payments for biodiversity could a farmer get on top of the carbon payments, on top of the crop itself as well. Management costs for this particular crop are in line with what we expected, and once we know more about what the management requires, that should reduce further. We're working with farmers and stakeholders about what is required for the farming management, but what we can do is be upscale, technology, and using existing controls. We know we can upscale it for quite low cost too, and we're hoping in the next year to increase it to 30 or 50 hectares. So watch this space. Just play this one very quickly. Sorry, my dog is now barking.
I don't think we can hear the volume on this one. Or is it just me?
It's us as well, Kayla. Mike, I don't know if there's any volume on this, is there? Or is it just the video and the text?
It's just a video on this one. Yeah.
Okay, just wanted to make sure.
Yeah. Very good. So which did you find worked best, Mike, of the two?
So the one we found worked best in the short term was the pellets, but over a longer period, if you leave it over for is the gel, you get a lot better spread. It just takes a bit longer to germinate. But the pellets look a lot more fun when you're dropping them from the drone.
Yeah.
So that kind of shows, and again, until we started the project, we didn't even know this drone company existed. So it's getting that information out there. And what we found out is the drone is a really efficient way of spreading. That drone can actually cover about 20 hectares in an hour if we get set up properly. So if you're looking at upscaling, being able to make it commercially viable, this is one way of doing it. So that was the Typha trial. The first trial we did was the carbon farm. Again, Doug's been up to here in May 2019. This, if you look at the picture on the left, this field was a heavily grazed field full of sheep, very intensively grazed. What we did was we back in during COVID, we basically blocked the drains. There were every 9 meters in this field, so the farmer really had to work hard to drain it. And what we did was strip the topsoil. We realized when we measured the carbon on that that is not a good idea. So what we've done is develop new techniques using time, but using different crops and water management. So now when we're doing any of our trials, like the Typha trial and the one you'll see at the, what I'll talk about in a minute, we haven't done that. You know, that was a big learning for us. And what we planted was by hand, and this is now being mechanized by one of our partners, Bidemos, 150,000 sphagnum plugs over 4 hectares. Within a year, we were able to reduce emissions, which I'll go through on the next slide. But you can see over 2 years, it took 3 years to get full sphagnum cover. But once we got the full sphagnum cover, that establishment year, the first 12 to 18 months was key to management. And we had to spend a lot of time getting that right. We made a lot of mistakes. This was back in 2020. But what we did, that we took these mistakes, we learned from them, and we were able to then move that into our next trials and so on. Yeah, one problem that we had on this site was weed cover, and you can see the graph on the right that we had a difference between east and west, and we think that that was down to one area. The field next to it was still being added nutrients to it, and within that period that it accelerated the weed growth. But by just over 3 years, we got full coverage of sphagnum across the area, and that's gone from being a massive source of carbon. Yeah, we used the control site. So in year 1, it was the grazed pasture was just under 21 tons of CO2 equivalent per hectare per year. We reduced that just by re-wetting to 2.4. Yeah, it's changed during the different years over the first 3 years, but by year 4, which data we're still not set up fully properly, but it does show that that area is now a carbon sink, and we're going to be doing more monitoring this year as part of an Horizons project we're involved in. But what we found was that there was a 91% reduction in carbon emissions just by re-wetting and growing the sphagnum. Yeah, for those who don't know, sphagnum is obviously used is a keystone species of bogs, but it can be used for many things, one being peat-free alternative. So a lot within the UK, a lot of the peatlands were destroyed for peat cutting, and what we're doing is using this sphagnum to restore it eventually, but also, you know, what we're able to do is grow sphagnum as a peat-free alternative, and it's being modelled that in the UK we would need 5,000 hectares of sphagnum per year to meet the peat-free market if sphagnum was part of it. The reason by using sphagnum as a crop rather than the peat is that we can regrow, whereas with peat it takes thousands of years to to form and grow again. But also, you know, from the carbon savings, we're saving a lot of carbon within the from the site itself, which, yeah, the data we did and the analysis with Manchester Met Uni did saw that there was probably business as usual farming based on the subsidence of the peatland, and the drainage was less than 50 years below that. This site is a mile away from the sea, and it would have flooded out, and you would have salinity issues if we hadn't done this. And this is one of the reasons why we're looking at those coastal areas in particular. So our final trial I'm going to talk about today is our Rindle Weta farming trial. We mentioned earlier that we still need to produce food. So based on the paper by in Nature by Chris Evans in 2021, each suggested that if you increase the water table by for every 10 centimeters, you would get between 4 to 5 tons of CO2 equivalent per hectare. That was model data, and we wanted to prove if that was the case. So the trial Weta farming in the UK, we compared business as usual. So we manage the water table at both 30 and 50 centimetres below the surface. And we worked with the same farmer on the Typhus trial, or one of the Typhus trials, and he farmed as he would actively compare that to a business as usual, big high-end horticulturist who produces food for one of the main supermarkets in the UK. And we wanted to look at, was it possible to do, but also can we measure, what are the benefits in greenhouse gas emissions? That data is going to be published later this year, but we have seen a significant difference in the water table. And although there's not a significant difference in the emissions from what we've done as of yet, one of the things we're finding is that some of the management that we're doing is changing, and we're hoping that that will change this year. Yeah, we trialed 3 different crops first of all: celery, blueberries, and lettuce. I know, Doug, you're doing celery and blueberries. We measured the nutrients and soil chemistry, the water table, and the carbon emissions coming from the ground. And we've seen that we can maintain the high level of water. This year, I'm pleased to say that we planted Chinese leaf lettuce in May, and radish by seed, and the radish are doing really, really well. So is the Chinese leaf, and we're hoping to have a full harvest. Although the water table this year, because of the hydrology and the lack of rain, is at 50 centimetres. We haven't been able to maintain it at 30 centimetres. So we've learned a lot about what we're doing within this project. We've learned we can maintain water table below 30 and 50 centimetres. One of the things we've done is we've measured the actual age of the carbon emissions, and we've reduced them from 1200 BP on the Rindle trial, so that's before present, to 386, and that's alone just by raising that water table to 30 and 50 centimetres, and that's the mean across the site. We've just got new data from business as usual, and the carbon age from that site, which is drained about 1.5 meters to 2 meters down, is actually over 4,000 years old. So we're releasing ancient carbon by these current farming practices, which is why we need to keep it in the ground. Emissions data is still being processed, but we are showing the emissions can be significant, in places can be significant, especially net ecosystem respiration. Food crops will need to be chosen based on minimum intervention. So what we're seeing is that the ones that don't have high turnover, like 3-4 crops per year, have less need for fertilizer, can be perennial, like the blueberry, their emissions are a lot lower. So these are so it might be that we can still produce food on lowland peat, but we need to be a lot smarter about what food we produce. Cover crops, we're starting to trial cover crops, and we're hoping that will reduce the emissions down further and minimize water loss. One of the things we found is that operating costs are higher due to increased weed control and management. So that's why we need to look at ways we can bring in further funding through green finance, through nature-based solutions, to actually make this profitable for the farmers. And one of the things I've said all the way through this presentation is that we need to work with our farmers, and that's the only way we can do that. And we wouldn't have got where we've got to without working with our farmers. So this is some of our farmers, and I'll just quickly go through this. This is their view of what's going on.
South West Lancashire, and we grow mainly arable crops: wheat, barley, oats, oilseed rape beans, and then we also grow some potatoes as well. Get me walking through a puddle if you want.
I'm Catherine Wright, and we farm at Tarleton, and we're mainly salad growers, growing lettuce, Chinese leaves, celery, and cabbage.
I'm Steve Dennany from Barton Moss in Eccles in Manchester. I'm here for nearly 40 years, growing potatoes, carrots, cabbages, cauliflowers, and cereals. So our soils are mainly, we do have some heavier ground, but I'd say 80% of the farm is on peat.
We have sort of 3 main soil types, but the predominant one is peat.
This is soil, so it's underlying peat. Probably 9 inches of topsoil, and then down to peat of about 3 meters to 5 meters to 7 meters.
Issues facing the farm in the future are weather. The really bad rain events we're getting are just causing a lot of the farm to be underwater for 6, 7, 8 months a year.
So obviously there's peat shrinkage, and soil is also our biggest resource. So going forward, we need to make sure we look after that, so then we can carry on farming and producing the crops we do.
Well, farming's going through a tough time anyway, as everyone knows. It's all over the press at the moment. So we have to look at different ways of how we're going to make an income if we're going to stay in the job.
I would describe wetter farming as farming a crop at a higher water table.
It's wetting the peat up. So the peat, when it's been drying out in the past, is releasing huge amounts of carbon dioxide. So bringing the water table up is almost stopping that. I think there's still some release, but very, very little compared to conventional farming.
It isn't something you do as a whole farm approach. It's looking at certain areas fit in better for it. There's certain places we know that don't grow the crops as well as they could do, but they would probably be more ideal to raise the water table there and try perhaps even an alternative crop.
I was approached by Lancashire Wildlife Trust about doing a trial just on a small scale to start with, doing 12 acres of growing bulrushes. A high value crop if we can get it right.
We applied for a type of trial and got the funding, and we thought, why not? Let's give it a go.
We decided to do it to see if it was one of the ways in which we could sort of manage our soils, manage the environment, look at whether we could grow our crops more sustainably. We just don't know, and it is the challenge, because every grower really wants to grow something, and you take pleasure in the challenge of knowing whether you can.
I think it's a really good idea to have a mosaic. So on the wet ground we have wetter farming with all the extra payments we can get on that, and then on the drier ground we still farm conventionally to produce food.
Well, the risks with wet farming are obviously the weather. That's the biggest risk. We don't know what's going to happen from one day to the next.
There's nothing worse than having standing water. That kind of is the opposite of what we want to achieve.
There's a lot of work to do to a field to prep it for wetter farming, because you have to dig an exterior bund. That has quite a big financial impact.
If we want to raise the water table on certain fields, what impacts that can have on our neighbours, higher up or lower down?
Because it is such a new crop, we're unsure of agronomy. So we don't know the pests, the diseases, how it grows, best time to sow.
Wet farming to me is an opportunity to try something new. We have an outlet for it. There's a company who are looking at taking the typha and using it for a natural lining for inside jackets, of which they have many orders apparently, and it's going very, very well.
It's all a bit of an unknown, but at the end of the day, it's a trial. So if it doesn't work, plenty of other options we can try.
We hope, from our point of view, it's a good message to get out to our customers, not only on the produce, but also from the environmental side of things.
If I was to advise any other farmers to do this trial, you have to make sure the funding is in place. If the funding's in place, I can't see a problem.
We need to think of a new type of farming, because it is still very good productive land. It's just too wet to grow crops as we were growing them.
Well, I'd share that because it really gives a perspective from a farmer's perspective rather than from an academic and from an NGO perspective. And these are the people we've been working now, for probably over 5 years, and we've built that relationship. And what we're getting in the UK is more and more people wanting to have those conversations. So what's next? So we're going to trial a variety of cover crops and weed controls. We're trialing alternative management to reduce emissions further. The blueberries will be obvious in the next few weeks. 2 new crops, which I mentioned earlier, and we're continuing developing MRV approaches, including a new PhD in crop performance, and we're looking at how to scale up. So there's a lot of exciting times. We've gone a long way, but there's still a lot for us to learn and a lot for us to share, and that's what we're looking at doing. And thank you very much. Any questions?
Thank you very much for that, Mike. So we've got a few questions in the chat. Could I just ask you, sorry, I don't want to, I know I'm kind of hosting and whatnot, so I can kind of impose myself, but just to give a bit of context, because not everyone watching necessarily has the same amount of background or experience. So we were looking at some of the farmers there, and it was kind of hinted at, but could you just talk a little bit more about the issues? So I don't think those farmers were necessarily giving you their best land to start playing around with. So what was it? And of course, the context there is that's arable farming. We've only got about 10,000 hectares of that here, and lots of grass, and you're kind of the other way around. So, why were they bothered about doing this in the first place? I think that's just useful to know.
I think the main reason why they're looking at it is that the young farmer there, Cameron, his mum and dad still run the farm, but he's taking over, and he sees that the yields are coming down as through conventional farming, that the turnover is lowering, and the storm events that we've seen through climate change. The other side, they're very close to the River Hull. Their land, the next door farmer's land breached in January. There was 13 breaches in that area. They can't farm as normal. Same with Catherine. She's about 5 miles up the road from there, and she's had very, very similar issues. And so they've got areas that that have already become unfarmable in conventional means. So these are the quick wins, and these are the ways we can learn the lessons of how politiculture can work before we scale up. And it's those conversations, it's those partnership building that we've been able to do that. Yes, you're right about the arable, but we've also got a new project funded by EU Horizons that will be looking at grazing at 30 and 50 centimetres to see what is possible. It's a bit more of a conservation grazing regime than what you guys have been looking at over in Ireland. But at the same time, we're going to be monitoring the greenhouse gas emissions and seeing what the savings are, and also what we're trying to do and work with these farmers and work with the people they supply is work on a kind of message that this is environmentally friendly food, and it's a way that we can do it.
So you can charge more essentially for that. So that's the income side. And just you didn't touch on it, but just again for the uninitiated, the issue with peat is organic soil, so it's all carbon. So when it's drained, it oxidizes. So I imagine those fields, they would have had a lot of shrinkage. So basically the field is disappearing every year. When you plow it, it's what, two centimeters a year, it's dropping. So the drainage is getting harder and harder to the point where it's, I presume in some of these cases, impossible to keep farming it conventionally is the issue.
The sites that win Marley, the carbon farm, if they kept up going in the next 15, 20 years at the rates they were losing from 1970, their site has dropped about 1.5 meters compared to the bog itself, which was on the first slide. That kind of levels of subsidence, when you're very close to sea level, isn't, and then you've got the storm events, it's just not sustainable over the long term. And if you lose that peat, then a lot of things are underneath. Overnight, it'll go from being grade 1 agricultural land to grade 3, and you'll only be able to do things like horsery, and those kind of things on there. So the value disappears. So these farmers have seen the kind of writing on the wall, they've seen them struggling, and they're trying to help us to develop ways that they can move their businesses forward.
Yeah, very good. Right. Sorry, now I'll ask Sinead's question. So I just wanted a bit of that context, Sinead, just because not everyone's aware. The whole peat shrinkage issue is a big thing. So obviously it depends how deep the field is. If you've got quite a lot of peat left, then maybe you're okay. But the closer you get into the underlying impermeable layer, the more difficult it is. So Sinead was just asking about TIFA. Is there a need to apply fertilizer? And then if it's near a special conservation area, I think that's your triple SIs, your special areas of conservation. Is that an issue? And so is there fertilizer needed? And if it's near an SSSI, is it a problem?
It potentially does need fertilizer. It depends on, so the two trials, one of them is actually, we're looking at the water purification qualities. So it depends on whereabouts in the catchment it is, where the water source is from. So, and the second trial, the water source is actually downstream of a UU treatment plant, so a water treatment plant. And there's a lot of natural phosphate and nutrients within there, so we're using that. And what we're trying to monitor, as well as seeing what the plants need, we're also seeing what the plants can remove from that system and what environmental benefits are from there. We were expecting in year 2 on the first trial, the one you saw the video for, but we haven't needed to as of yet. And I think one of the things we're looking at is around the biomass removal. Yeah, what are the benefits and what are the negatives of it? So at the moment, we're only wanting the crop, the seed head. There is other uses for the rest of the plant that could be used. So yeah, there's a lot of questions that we still need to answer around what's best. What I think will be the answer to that is it depends on where you are within the catchment, within the landscape, and also what your business model is as well. So, but obviously, yeah, we will wait and see. One of the things we are monitoring through the emissions is N2O. So both from DOC and food emissions,
yeah,
but also from the soil emissions as well. So we'll be able to see what those costs are from a carbon point of view.
very good. And then she was also asking, yeah, she prefers the idea of biodiversity to carbon credits. Is that a thing? Is it in the pipeline? Where's that going? Is that going to emerge?
So in the UK, there's biodiversity net gain. So biodiversity net gain is a metrics the UK government has put up, and it's for a lot of house building and development. And we used that model for the Typhus trial to see what that looked at, and because it uses habitat, it actually went the baseline decreased, and so we didn't actually get any money. It went from a modified grassland in moderate condition to a using UK ABS to a arable field non-food, which actually was no uplift. So what we've started to do, and we're working with the IUCN Peatland Code with this, is actually look at the Wallacean model methods. So rather than looking at habitat, we're going to be looking specifically at species uplift. And we've got a project that's actually doing that at the moment. I haven't got the findings yet because we're doing it in 2 weeks' time. But we think that is the way. And in the UK, a lot of the restoration, green finance products, Wilder Carbon or Peatland Code, are looking at that bundled approach, and we're open at producing a bundled approach for lowland agricultural peat as well. That includes biodiversity.
Yeah. So when you say bundle, that means the carbon, the biodiversity, and probably the water storage capacity as different ecosystem services being provided. And just from our experience as well, we're talking about the biodiversity uplift. Once you raise the water table, there's a lot of stuff in the peat that just spontaneously comes back, besides the dragonflies. So that's certainly the experience we had. Another question then. So well, I don't know if this is a bit of a broad question, Sinead. I think how can we take on the multinationals? Aldi's selling blueberries from Chile and Peru. How do we compete with this?
I think anyway, it's about
what's your thoughts on that, Mike?
I think it's about knowing your market. So when any farmer is looking at the crops they're growing, they've got to see can they sell them, and it's finding the ones that are commercially viable. The blueberries, you're right, Sinead. The UK market is £90 million per year. Most of that comes from Peru, America, and so on. We're not going to take that market from it. It's an established market. So it's a bit like what I mentioned earlier. It's about selling the additional benefits of that product. Yeah, it might work. Yeah, we don't see that. We see it as a mosaic of different crops. Yeah, some of those decisions are cultural, some of those are down to soil chemistry and everything, and and water availability, both upstream and downstream, and the effects of that. So, but the commerciality of it has got to be looked at, and so we're working with through Catherine, who you saw in the last video. We're working with their supply chain to look at produce and how we can sell it and market it at a higher product. I see blueberries as a kind of pick your own kind of benefit, and that's one of the things we're going to look at, not this year, next year. And we're also going to charge them extra if they get stuck in the bog to get them out. So we're looking at a circular economy here.
Very good. Right angle pipes for bonded trenches. I think that's a fairly common practice, just to contain the water level. That was another question.
Yeah, we tended to get
we use that in ours as well. This is just where you have the peat bond and you got the right angle pipe. You can just basically turn it up or down to let the water flow in or out of the trench, isn't it?
It is, and what we found though, especially from the carbon farm, is that because when you reweight the peat, especially if it's been dried on farmland, agricultural land for a long time, it will swell and do weird things. And some of those pipes moved the opposite way. So what we've done a lot in a lot of our projects now is we switched to pipes for weirs. It gives us a lot more control over volume when we need it, but at the same time, you don't have those same problems of the with the U-bends as we had. So that's been one of the lessons we've learned.
And then I think you were saying the methane didn't go up as much as you anticipated, because again, one of the concerns here, and you were using the dreaded re-wetting word, and we were looking at flooded fields, which is what gives farmers the heebie-jeebies. I know you need it for cattails, but I think you were showing the methane from a I suppose, greenhouse gas point of view, methane emissions didn't go up as much as you thought.
No, not for the cattails, but not for the carbon farm where we grew the sphagnum. There we would maintain the water table at 10 centimeters below, and we've had a lot more control there because of the way of what we did it. And we have got the water you saw on the Typha trial on the videos is only there for about a month a year. What we tend to do is the water retention areas there where we're also measuring the water storage areas. We're also measuring the methane, and what we're using is a number of small microcosm trials to look at both natural and non-natural products that can actually minimize both evaporation but also methane as well. So
very good. Okay, thank you. So we have another question from Lucy Jenkins. I think maybe I can add a bit. So it's just about planning or policy barriers in Ireland to block this being brought in practice. So that's what we're doing on our 2 farms, Lucy. So we've done about a dozen different crops that we've proven the principle. We're doing it at a larger scale with blueberries and sphagnum and with wet grassland. We haven't quite reached Mike's scale yet, but that's definitely ongoing. There's also a project you're part of, Mike, that will be looking at that, and of course, Sinead is working with a blueberry farmer as well. So I don't think there's any particularly policy barriers. I think there's definitely policies that would help, that would facilitate it. But I don't know, is there anything that you think you know from the UK that might be applicable over here, or would be a worry, or might be a block perhaps?
I think in the UK there's a few more barriers. Things like abstraction licenses can take over a year to get. If you're blocking a ditch, you need to go through a main river. You need to it's a very lengthy process, and again could take a year. But the EA and the government are looking at those, reducing the stress on that. I think the biggest issue that we've come, and which is why we're developing a training course, is that when you are talking to local county councils who give you the consent, they don't know what wet farming is, they don't know what politiculture is, they don't know what the benefits are, and so we've got a project sort of based on an extension on the Typha trial called PFP+, and one of the things we're doing is designing a training course for landowners. And one of the things that they've done in East Anglia, it's worth having a look in the Broads, is they've created a document that looks at how to overcome some of the barriers as well. So, and that's really, really useful.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, no, a lack of awareness is a huge thing. So next question, and again, same again from Lucy, was which crop is most profitable with the least carbon release? Is there any suggestions sphagnum could be profitable with carbon credits and net gain payments? If I could just say something on that, Mike, before you answer. What we do, Lucy, is we give it's voluntary, right? The farmers pick. So what might be optimum environmentally isn't necessarily optimum from the farmers. So if we're dealing with farmers and their fields are drained for a meter, any increase in water level is great. It has big climate benefits. So what we do is we give a range of options and let them pick, and they're moving in the right direction, and they're getting used to the whole new concept of a new kind of farming. But yeah, I think optimally, maybe the sphagnum is optimum from the environmental point of view, Mike. That would be a fair comment.
Yeah, I think from
the point of view of getting farmers on board, because that's what it's all about. That's the bottom line. If farmers aren't interested, we're all wasting our time. Yeah.
Well, one of the things Catherine, it wasn't clear on the videos, Catherine's actually doing sphagnum trial rather than Typha. So she's chosen that as a crop and is working with Beda Moss on that. One of the main things I think from that is it's about what's right for the land first and foremost. There's no point trying to grow sphagnum in an area that's got so much soil chemistry that it's going to take 10 years to make it viable to grow. So it's that baseline is key to actually understanding what is the right choice for the farmer. And we feel I really strongly believe that it's a mosaic of land use, because the answer is going to be what is environmentally beneficial at the top of the catchment will be different at the bottom of the catchment, and Joe, your farmer next door, has got a big say in what water he needs and everything else as well. And so there's lots of questions like that need to feed into the right crop choice. From an environmental friendly point of view, sphagnum is probably the best crop at the moment that we've discovered, but there is a lot of issues with sphagnum as a crop at the moment. We can grow it, and we have done for carbon farming, but for sphagnum farming, where you remove the sphagnum and you use it for peat-free alternative, there's still a major issue around weeds. They're looking for a very pure crop, and it's not. We've got a lot of things we've got to. They're working on it to actually develop weed controls, but it is very, very difficult.
Yeah. And one of the things we're doing with our Peatlands for Prosperity project, where the farmers are just beside the training and showing the polluticulture farmers, is we're doing the baseline surveys, like you were saying, Mike. What is the pH? And broadly speaking, what we've seen with our work is that there's two categories. There's basically the boggy plants, so the sphagnum and maybe the cranberries and whatnot. And then there's the ones that prefer the fen peat, the kind of fossier stuff that needs more nutrients. So we'd be basing recommendations off of, as you were saying, what is the pH and how much nutrients is there, because sphagnum isn't a great fan of it. So it's what's appropriate. But as I said, what a farmer might pick, and again, I'll just give one example. We had a contractor, very commercial. He just took a fancy to blueberries, so he's going to do blueberries. You wouldn't have think he was going to go for that, but that's it, because we have a range of things and they can pick what they want. Then that's kind of what they went with. And then just the last question I have on the feed, unless someone else wants to pitch in and say something. So Elena was just asking about the upland bogs. Anything particularly suitable for that? I don't know if you're mainly lowland stuff, Mike, aren't you?
Yeah, so we do upland restoration as part of what Lancashire Wildlife Trust do. From a politiculture point of view, uplands hasn't quite reached the uplands in the UK yet. There's a lot of kind of questions, very similar to what you guys have got around common land and things like that. So, and sheep grazing, and there is certain crops that I think will grow there. I think grazing, in a more environmentally friendly way, using different types of livestock is definitely a possibility in the long run, but I think there's a lot more research needed in that area. And I think at the moment within the UK, it's very much a lowland perspective, but as you said at the beginning, that's where a lot of our arable farming is, and that's where a lot of our emissions are coming from. So that's we're trying to solve that problem first before we kind of move into the other areas. Tomorrow,
I think if I can add, we'll be doing a new EIP where we'll be doing a bit of work in Leitrim, so that's very much upland blanket bog territory. And also, just anecdotally, when we were prepping one of our farms, we had one of the volunteers. As a child, he used to go into the Wicklow Mountains with the locals. They would pick cranberries, they would put them on the ferry, and then they go on the train, and they'd be in Harrods in the morning for cranberry sauce for the hoi polloi. So cranberries is definitely a goer in terms of a potential upland crop. And as Mike was saying, there's other things, so we'll be looking at as well, just to see what could be useful there.
Doug, I might just jump in there, because that's exactly. Hi, Elena. You know the areas that we operate in Connemara, and we are looking at exactly what Doug said: cranberries, blueberries, sphagnum, and also aronia berries or chokeberries. They work very well. All of those are acid loving. They're very tolerant of our blanket bog. So those are the ones that we're going to experiment with, if that helps.
Thank you. Nice. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Could I just ask, I think it was kind of hinted at, just what kind of money we were talking about, Mike? Because that's the bottom line at the end of the day. A farmer's going to be able to make an income. What kind of figures? Like you talk about cattails, I've seen some myself, and sphagnum. So you're probably going to start maybe at the high end of the market. a bit niche. But
Yes.
what would be reasonable income that could be generated? Because and they're also quite high. Well, I suppose maybe if the average Irish farmer, those figures are quite high, but you're kind of dealing with commercial farmers who are getting serious amounts of income from small areas. So the 4 to 5 grand per hectare of site preparation wasn't too drastic for them, maybe. But what would be some of the kind of figures you could be getting from
we're
successful
kind of the
cattail
kind of
crop?
figures we're looking at the moment. So for sphagnum in the UK, BDMOS are kind of looking at about £30,000 per hectare per year. But that's over a 3-year cycle, so you wouldn't get it in year one. You'd get 90,000 in year 3. But and that's then broke down over the years. But that doesn't include the current costs. So of management of that's the actual retail value. So we do need to reduce those costs. For one of the things for the kind of food crops, they were about the weed management and costs were about 35% more, and this was again mirrored in the fens as well than in business as usual. So that's why we need to look at the kind of carbon credits, and we need to look at the biodiversity credits and bundling them together. With those, carbon credits in the UK at the moment through Wilder Carbon are selling about £100 a ton. If you look at the carbon farm per hectare, we had a 20-ton saving from year 1. So that's £2,000 per hectare per year. On top of that 30,000, and then there's hopefully other benefits. The UK government have announced high water table payments for lowland peat that go up to £1,500 per hectare, and that's or £1,409 for arable, and that's driving a lot of conversations in the UK with farmers and people like ourselves at the moment. And but we're still waiting to see the fine details on that. Kind of TIFA is looking at £3,000 to £4,000 per ton of seed head, but then there's multiple things that we're still trying to develop for the business model that should see that go up. And we're seeing really good, significant savings on carbon, that if you did the bundled approach, then you are. So this isn't a kind of ready-made, we grow this, we're going to make a load of money. It's about, there's a long process to go. But what we're finding is that the business models that we're looking at, when you're combining nature-based solutions with crops, with government subsidies, you are actually making more than what they're currently making. So
yeah, very good. So the stacking process, basically the crop, maybe reduce yield. You were talking about maybe higher income because it's environmentally friendly produce with lots less environmental impact, carbon income and or biodiversity, but all of that together. And of course, as somebody was saying, we have our Chugga Scarag research body here in Ireland. One of the grass research there says, we've been testing ryegrass for 50 years. We're just starting on multi-species swards. Well, you've only been at this since 2019. We've only been at it since 2021 or whatever. So we've got a long way to go. But I think there's a lot. The point is there's a lot of potential, and it fixes a lot of agricultural problems with these problem fields that these farmers are dealing with. Correct?
yeah, definitely. And we've got to try something, and we've got a long way in 5-6 years, but we've still got a long way to go. We're honest with that with every farmer engagement that we do, and but without, it's only about, one of the things that we're really focusing on is breaking down that conservation farming barriers, and it's about working together. And the only way we're going to get these solutions in time and make them economically viable is by talking to each other, by working with each other, and so on. So,
which we're doing. Yes, very good. And what do you think about our situation, Mike? So obviously you were saying 98%, was that the figure of all of the peat in Lancashire is being used for good farming practices? We've got a lot of cutover land, which is kind of wasteland. Nobody's doing anything with it. And we see the potential there for the carbon money, for producing new crops, maybe biomass and stuff. You don't have any areas like that. So I think that for us, we see that as a big opportunity. You don't have anything like that. You'd like to have that, would you?
yeah, well, we would love to have that. I think one of the things we've done we've had a few grants that have been available in the UK for the last 5-6 years now that have helped us to restore areas that we've classed as remnant raised bogs. And yeah, we see that as part of the model. So if you think of, you've got areas where you can restore, we will restore, and you can get money for that if they're owned privately. If you and then around that buffer, you would traditionally have like fen as in Ireland, and it's about creating pluticulture as a way of recreating that hydrological to safeguard those triple SIs and those areas at the same time, kind of create that commercial viability. And I think we're looking at it slightly differently to what you guys are, but again, we haven't got much left within Lancashire that we haven't restored. As we've over the last 5 years, we've done something nearly over 10,000 hectares of remnant bog, of lowland raised bogs within Lancashire. So yeah, we're starting to it's why we realise we've got to look at a landscape scale, and that isn't always going to be about restoration.
Yeah, and you mentioned the buffer concept as well. So, and we'd have the same thing like you've seen when you came over. We got the remnant bit of bog in the middle. There's the cutover lands, and we have the agricultural lands outside that. So converting those cutover lands to polluted culture obviously gives income to the farmer where he doesn't have any, and it's also then buffering. It's essentially is raising the water table on the remnant bog in the middle and bringing that back to a good condition, with potential carbon income as well. So that whole buffering process is the key part of the concept.
Definitely.
Brilliant.
Amazing.
Okay, any other questions from anybody, or is it time to say thank you very much for that great presentation, Mike?
Thank you so much. Well, thank you everyone for joining. Thank you, Mike, so much for that amazing session. I know I really enjoy videos as well, and like the visuals of seeing it broken down. So that was immensely helpful. I also want to mention we have some upcoming dates, and I'm going to post a link in chat for everyone, so you can check them out. We have an on-farm training coming up on the 17th, and we have a guest speaker for that, 17th of July, I should say. So it's called No Farm, No Food, No Fiber, No Future with Elder Van Wieren. That is going to be an amazing session. And then we have another webinar coming up as well in July, with Paul. I think it's Leadbitter. Leadbitter. Okay.
Yeah.
I was going to say lead bitter.
No.
The American comes out in the worst times. And then Lisa Gill. And this will be on peatland restoration and carbon financing in North England. So we're very excited about those. The link that I posted in chat will take you to our Eventbrite page. And I encourage you to follow us on Eventbrite. You'll get notifications as we update the future events. You can kind of see just a general view of what our schedule is going to look like for the rest of the year. And we'll be updating it as we add speakers to those events. So let's stay connected. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, Taylor. No, in fact, no, you finished.
I was just going to say, let's stay connected. If you scan the QR code, this will take you to our link tree. We have a lot of great resources on there. We have blogs, articles that we've been featured in, some great videos, and links to our YouTube channel as well. So you can catch up on some of our other sessions. Last year, we did a great series on pluticulture, and we have a great session on pluticulture 101. So I think most of you seem pretty well informed, so maybe the 101 is a little beneath you, but if there's someone you know who might be interested in learning about the 101s of pluticulture and why it is so important, it's a great video to go check out, and that's on our YouTube channel.
Okay, and just what I wanted to finish on, thanks very much for that, Kayla. Just with our Peatlands for Prosperity project, if you're not already in the know about it, we are running these on-farm workshops. We have these 2 poluticulture farms. There's lots of different crops being trialed. It's great to actually see stuff being done and hear from the farmers rather than just hear us talking about it, I suppose, indirectly. And also part of the project, if you're a farmer, if you know of any farmers, we do free farm surveys. And just as Mike was saying, we basically look at the different peatland areas and say, look, this might be good for these crops. That would also be good. This is your carbon income potential. And we also help them get going on some of these crops. So yeah, if you are interested, or if you know anyone that's interested, yeah, just get in touch and we'd be delighted to come and check it out. Thank you very much.
Yes, on our website, we have an expression of interest. form. So you can actually just direct them to the website and it'll be on there. It's pretty easy to navigate to, but they can also contact us directly if they're not sure or they just want to ask us some questions before they submit an expression of interest. So,
Yeah,
all right.
brilliant.
Thank you,
Okay.
everyone.
Thanks, and thanks again, Mike. That was brilliant. We say Bula Boss in that's we all have very basic Irish from school. That's all we can remember because we don't actually use it. So I think Bula Boss for Mike. Thank you very much for your time. Very busy guy doing great work and sharing it with us. It's great to be working and collaborating with Mike and all of the great stuff being done in the UK.